So maybe it's just because I have Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson on the brain recently, but I cannot stop thinking about Disney's Moana 2. Not because it's particularly good or bad, but because its existence and its success represent a lot for the future of the Disney brand. If you don't know, we didn't know about this movie's existence until February of this year, and it just came out like a week ago, which is highly unusual for a brand as successful and recognizable as Moana. Basically, Disney has had a couple of flops in the last couple of years, and they don't like flops. Marvel hasn't been doing so hot, an Indiana Jones sequel came out that wasn't super well received. Disney's animated features have been very hit or miss, either because of the quality itself, or because they're not putting consistent effort into marketing new things. And many of these mistakes were made under former CEO Bob Chapek, who replaced former CEO Bob Iger, who has now come back from the dead to replace former CEO Bob Chapek. Not confusing at all. Anyway, Bob Iger is back to right the ship and make the company several trillion more dollars instead of a middling, pathetic several billion more dollars. And one of Robert's first orders of business was to come up with something that could rival Universal's Wicked in terms of a winter family-friendly holiday blockbuster. And so Moana 2 was announced at a winter shareholder meeting earlier this year. But how do you create, market, and distribute a movie as important in stature as Moana 2 in less than a year, you might ask? You don't. You simply take a Disney Plus series that was already in development by a Canadian subsidiary, and you continue to outsource that animation until it somewhat resembles a real feature-length film. Okay, so slight correction here, kind of. I can't find like a definitive confirmation on where this falls in terms of outsourcing, but parts of this movie were done by the Canadian studio, parts of it were done by the Burbank studio. Some people believe that this is definitively considered outsourcing, others believe that this is a more commonly done technique than you might think. And outsourcing primarily has a negative connotation because it can be used to skirt union rules. But if you don't care about box office numbers or the strength of the animation industry workforce, you're probably just curious to know whether or not Moana 2 could be considered a good film, or at the very least, a coherently made film. And it's kind of complicated. So I feel like the original Moana that came out in 2016 was one of Disney's last big, greatest hits. It made a whole bunch of money, it had an original concept and premise, the music is great, it utilizes the more modern 3D animation, but it's still like stylized in a fun way. And it does make sense that it would get a sequel, but also Disney sequels have never historically been great anyway. Look at something like Frozen. It's a very popular film, it's not surprising that they would want to do more with it, but like, I feel like nobody talks about Frozen 2. But you know, we had to put Frozen everywhere in the form of a sequel, it's in the parks a lot more, it had a Broadway stage adaptation. And Moana is now also getting to that point of commercialization, and we'll talk about the live adaptation in a little bit, but like, at its core, Moana is a very good movie. But it only works because the folks who made it had a very singular vision and really worked to make it successful. It's the kind of property that is so thoughtful in its presentation that like any attempt at half-assing a sequel is just going to come off bad by default. Hello everyone, this is some guy that lives in my house.
Hello.
His name is Brian. Brian also saw Moana with me, and as
Moana 2.
Moana 2. And as semi-Disney enthusiasts, we are going to talk about what this movie means for the future of Walt Disney Animation.
Nothing good.
Nothing good. This movie was painfully mid.
Yeah.
And that seems to be a standard that Walt Disney as a company is getting very fine with and very complacent with, and as longtime fans of the brand and the things that they've created in the past, we don't like that.
Moana 2 is the most Disney sequel to ever Disney sequel. It has no reason for existing. The story is very bland and non-offensive, inoffensive, and kind of doesn't go anywhere. Characters don't really evolve or change at all. They're just kind of static. You know, hey, look at these characters with the voices you know. Like, it only exists to make the Walt Disney Company stock price go up.
They're so good at making Green Line go up.
Yeah, gotta love the Green Line going up.
And reviewing this movie for me is so frustrating because I feel like 2/3 of it are completely half-assed, which makes sense because this was supposed to be a Disney Plus show. But there's one particular sequence in here that actually has a lot of potential. And if it were handled by people who set out to make Moana 2 a film, I really think it had the potential to be great. And that sucks. So right now I'm gonna give a quick summary of the plot of the movie. If you want to skip over the summary because you haven't seen it yet and you want to avoid spoilers, the timestamps are down below. Moana is exploring other islands with the hopes of connecting with other tribes, because as of right now, her tribe is very isolated. They're isolated because of a storm god named Nalo who hates mortals, and to strengthen his power over said mortals, he sinks an island that apparently connects all of these islands and all of these tribes under the ocean. And it is very quickly revealed that apparently Moana's people, the Motunui, will go extinct if they cannot connect with other tribes. So Moana grabs some friends from the island and they all head off on the boat for this adventure. Then there's some antics on the sea with the Kakamora, you know, the little coconut guys. And the crew eventually finds Maui in the lair of a character named Matangi who works for Nalo. Matangi is sort of coded to be a villain, but she ends up helping the crew escape. And they end up escaping to Nalo's realm where they can raise the island and break the curse. According to Wikipedia, Moana literally dies during this sequence after Nalo zaps her with a lightning bolt, but then Maui does this special chant and helps to revive her. Then they end up raising the island and connecting with other tribes. Okay, so this plot is very disjointed. I'm not the first person to say this, but you can literally tell where each episode of the Disney Plus series was supposed to start and stop. A lot of aspects of the plot feel very rushed as a result. It's like, oh, okay, we have to go raise the island right now, or, you know, our entire village is going to die because reasons. Okay, let's go. Moana has these friends that she brings with her on this journey, but they are all very one-dimensional and they have like one characteristic for you to remember them by, and this is something that ideally you would develop in a series over time, but because it's a movie, they kind of just get left hung out to dry. This little side character that they encounter has a fun little song, but like her motivations are very unclear. We don't really get enough of her backstory. She just exists to like propel them to the third act. Speaking of the third act, that was my favorite part of this film, and that's the part of the film that I think has a lot of potential. For a lot of this movie, Maui and Moana are pretty separated, and their dynamic is a big part of what makes the first one so good. So when they come back together, you're like, okay, I feel the heart here. The jokes start landing more because the dynamic suddenly gels a bit better, and the ending climax has some actual stakes because you're like, okay, now I'm 100% on board with the characters that I care about from the first film. But even aspects of that are rushed because, like, there are things that happen visually to Moana to signify a change in her, but it's never explicitly communicated what that change is. As far as the sights and sounds here, I think the animation looks good for the most part. I think it's pretty on par with what you would expect from a Disney film of this caliber. I couldn't point to anything and I was like, that is badly animated, you know? The music is painfully mid, and this is like a running meme right now where everyone's like, oh, everyone was shitting on Lin-Manuel Miranda, and it turns out that it's actually really hard to write good songs for Disney movies. Because if you don't know, and you might not know because they try really hard to hide this by making the music sound very Lin-Manuel Miranda inspired, the music in this film was not written or composed by him. And this is a problem that I've had with Disney animation for a while now in regards to their music, where they're going more for like a typical pop sound in a lot of their movies instead of music that's inspired by the roots of musical theater. Obviously, Lin-Manuel Miranda is a theater guy, and while Moana's original music is not done 100% in that style, it does draw some heavy inspiration from old school theatrics, as much as it draws from more modern influences like rap and hip-hop. The music here is just very soulless and forgettable because clearly it wasn't a priority. Okay, this is our new version of How Far I'll Go. This is our new Maui song where he does a little bit of rapping and it's like fun and stylized. I think the best song in it is the song that this new side character Matangi sings, and that makes sense because it's the equivalent of like the Tamatoa number in the original movie. Overall, this movie came out super rushed and disjointed and forgettable, which is a lot of what I could have predicted given the context of how this film was ultimately developed and made. And there's two main things that piss me off about it. One, like I said, I think the third act had a lot of potential, but because of the circumstances, it still felt super rushed overall, and it wasn't worth the payoff of the first two acts of the film. And two, we don't really need a Moana cinematic universe. And to talk more about what I mean here, I'm gonna give a brief spoiler for the end credits scene because yes, this movie has an end credits scene. They even do this like very literal like Thanos end credits scene interpretation where the villain that you think is gonna actually be in the movie isn't in the movie.
No.
Like but he's at the end and you're like, and he's like talking to a character that we met for a second.
Yeah, and a like, random character from the first movie.
Right, and you're like, oh. We can spoil Tamatoa, because Shafrillis already talked about Tamatoa.
Yeah, Shafrillis is in Moana 2.
Shafrillis is in Moana 2. Yeah. Go see it because we love Phyllis Productions.
We do.
So yeah, basically this movie robs you of seeing a villain and then puts him at the end, implying, I guess, that somewhere down the line there will be a Moana 3. And like, it's not even the fact that this is going to imply a trilogy. There are plenty of trilogies out there in the world that have been made that are very successful because they were developed with a 3-story arc in mind. But this just feels like we're getting robbed of a complete story and movie in order to service another movie down the line that doesn't exist, is currently not in development, and probably won't be for like another 2 years at least. You know, Disney's just taking recognizable IP and not doing anything of note or due diligence with it. They're just, you know, moving little pegs into holes regardless of whether they fit there or have a clear intent or purpose. And I think now is as good of a time as any to take a little detour related to what I'm talking about here. Brian.
Yeah.
While I have you, the people want to know your thoughts about the closing of MuppetVision 3D. Specifically, they asked, what does Kayla's boyfriend think about the closing of MuppetVision 3D? So, let her rip.
I think if I remember correctly, it was announced on November 22nd, and I think it's the worst thing to ever happen on November 22nd in our country's history, by far. It is, it really sucks. It really sucks. There's no reason for it. They are desecrating the final artistic creation of Jim Henson and the Muppets, his Muppets. You know, it's so perfect. It's ageless. It is. I know it doesn't fill, the theater doesn't fill up these days. I get that, but you know, it's still just so much fun, and so it's the last of a dying breed. And I'm very upset about it. I knew it was probably coming when they announced all the, you know, Monsters Inc. stuff, but I still don't see a reason why. Disney World specifically, if this was Disneyland in California where it's like they're literally boxed in and that they don't have a lot of room to expand, Disney World is just endless land, and like there's no, like, they could just expand Hollywood Studios. They could just expand it and build everything they want, but no, they need to, you know, work within these random parameters and close this beloved thing that clearly means a lot to a lot of people, myself included, and I'm heartbroken, and I'm gonna do whatever I can to go one last time to experience it before they preserve it, which means just putting on Disney Plus. So thank you, Bob Iger, for absolutely nothing, you fool.
So the last thing I want to talk about here is the insanity that is the live-action Moana remake, which is currently filming right now. This was announced a couple months ago by Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson himself. It is widely speculated that this wasn't like fully in development because Moana, the original, only came out like 8 years ago. But in previously covered ground, we've established that The Rock often picks or forces through projects that serve his ego, and as of right now, Disney is still bending to his will. So I think that's why this is getting made. I'm not entirely sure. So far, we've just seen leaked stills from filming, and it looks fine. But why does it have to exist? You know what I mean? For example, in these photos, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, and he has confirmed this, is wearing like a muscle suit. Even though he's already a very muscular man, but he's wearing the suit to build this, you know, equivalent appearance of Maui, who has a very distinct animated form. So if there's no way for that to practically be achieved in live action, because I actually think that Maui has a really cool and unique design, then why are we doing it? What's the point? So we can all go to the movie theater and be like, wow, look, that's Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson as Maui, a character that he already voiced. We're just going through the motions for the sake of going through them at this point. And I expect better from the most legacied entertainment company in the world. And it's not just like, the problem doesn't end with Moana 2, and that's a problem in and of itself. Like, every time we go to the theater a lot, and every time we've gone to the theater, we've seen an ad for this Mufasa prequel that's coming out that looks gray and bland, and, you know, in this case, I guess isn't a rehash of something they've already done, but in a way it still is. And it just and you know, it's not only that, but it's also like the Lilo and Stitch remake. Like, it's just like, what is Disney offering? Snow White. What is Disney offering at this point?
The live-action Moana.
The live-action Moana. What is Disney offering at this point that, like, isn't a reference to something that they used to do that was, like, better. You know what I mean?
Pretty much nothing original.
And I'm going to acknowledge here that I'm part of the problem, because I went to go see Moana 2 out of curiosity to see just how bad it was. And now I've contributed to the piles and piles and infinite piles of money that this is going to make. And like, maybe that's a conversation that we all need to have about moving the needle with our wallets in order to get these companies to be better. But my point is, like, we shouldn't have to do that. They should just want to be better. And instead, every major media and entertainment conglomerate is focusing on cutting corners and utilizing AI when they can and centering IP that already exists so they don't have to do the work of marketing anything original, thus ruining the legacy of old IP that we actually like. It's a terrible cycle, and we live in hell. But I bet you already knew that. At least this movie had more of the Kakamora, though. I love those little guys. Thanks for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.